The hum of the alarm cracked through the silence of the barracks like a slap to the face. I wasn't asleep, not really, but it didn't matter. Every damn morning, that sound hit, and you were on your feet before you even realized what was going on. Training kicks in that fast. No snooze button, no second thoughts. The guys around me started moving, the low murmur of boots hitting the floor and the shuffle of gear echoing in the dim light. We had 15 minutes to get ready, but I didn't need a clock to know it was a crunch. I was used to this routine. Hell, I could probably do it with my eyes closed. Get dressed, check the weapon, check the ammo, grab my helmet, and head out. The barracks was already starting to smell like sweat and cheap coffee. Never a good combo. I yanked on my boots and tossed my rifle onto the bed, giving it a once-over. Everything was locked and loaded, but something felt off. This wasn't just another drill or routine sweep. You could feel it in the air. Tension. Every guy in the room knew something was coming. Sergeant Miller walked in, a man built like a brick wall. He had that look in his eyes, the kind that told you it was time to move. You're all being pulled for something special today. He barked, no warmth in his voice. Pack up, double time it to the vehicles. We've got a mission, and I don't have time to coddle anyone. Got it? Miller wasn't a fan of small talk. He didn't need to be. We got it. We knew what that meant. I grabbed my gear and followed the others out. The trucks were already waiting outside the barracks, engines running. The sun was barely coming up, casting long shadows across the gravel. We weren't heading out for a simple recon or supply run. This was different. We piled into the trucks, the steel doors slamming shut behind us. The ride was a blur of bouncing over potholes, the smell of diesel, and the rumble of the engine. My hands rested on my rifle, but I didn't grip it too tightly. You get too tight, you end up in your own head, and the moment you do that, you're already losing. I let my mind wander for a second, but I didn't let myself think too long. Just long enough to remind myself why I was still here. All right, listen up. Miller's voice came over the comms, cutting through the static. You've all been briefed. This isn't a walk in the park. We're deep behind enemy lines. No backup. No air support unless we hit the target. We do this clean. We do this fast. Or we don't do it at all. If you see a target, you engage. If you get caught, you make sure we're never caught. He was blunt, but that's why we followed him. The man wasn't about fluff. We hit the drop zone an hour later. It was quiet when we stepped off the trucks. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your nerves itch. I could hear my own breath, the rustle of gear against fatigues, and the soft crunch of boots against the dirt. Everything was on edge, but that's just how it is when you're dropped into enemy territory. The first couple minutes are always the worst. Those minutes where everything is a potential threat, and you have no idea what's lurking. Move out, Miller barked. We spread out in a quick, practiced formation, making our way through the underbrush. No chatter, no jokes, no distraction. Just the soft thudding of boots and the occasional crack of branches underfoot. We kept our weapons close, scanning every inch of the area. The trees looked the same, dark, thick, and tangled. Not exactly the kind of place you'd want to get caught with your pants down. A few minutes later, we came to the edge of a clearing, and that's when it hit me. The air felt wrong. Maybe it was the way the breeze stopped, or how the birds suddenly went silent, but something about it wasn't right. And then I heard it. The first footstep, soft but deliberate, too controlled to be an animal. I tensed, pulling my rifle to my shoulder, my eyes scanning the area. Eyes up, I whispered just loud enough for the others to hear. Miller gave a quick nod, signaling for us to stay tight. I could see the rest of the squad shifting, weapons raised, ready to move at a second's notice. And that's when it happened. A burst of gunfire cut through the silence, and everything went to hell. The world exploded around us. We hit the dirt instinctively, the sound of bullets ricocheting off trees and the whizzing of rounds overhead. I didn't think, just reacted, rolling to the side, keeping my head low, moving for cover. My rifle was already up, eyes trained on the direction of fire. The first enemy soldier appeared out of nowhere, sprinting across the clearing. He didn't see us until the last second, and by then it was too late. I squeezed the trigger, the sharp report of my rifle cutting through the chaos. He dropped like a sack of bricks. But there was no time to savor the kill. More appeared, pouring out of the woods, gunfire filling the air as we returned fire. It was chaos. Controlled chaos, but chaos all the same. I moved with the team, watching my back, watching the flanks, picking off targets as we moved forward. The enemy was scattered, but they were organized. This wasn't a random skirmish. This was an ambush. We took cover behind fallen trees, using them as shields while we returned fire. I heard the pop of grenades, the dull thud of explosions in the distance, and the crackle of gunfire from every direction. "Push forward! Push forward!" Miller shouted over the comms. We didn't hesitate. We couldn't. There was no second guessing. You either moved or you got left behind. As we moved through the clearing, bullets whizzing by, my mind was on autopilot. No time to think. No time to question. Just fight. Then I saw him. An enemy soldier about 20 feet out, crouching low, weapon raised. He didn't know I was there. He didn't know I had him in my sights. I took him down with a single shot, the sharp crack of the rifle echoing in my ears. But before I could feel any satisfaction, I heard the unmistakable sound of more footsteps, closer this time. The gunfire didn't stop. If anything, it got louder. More enemy soldiers poured into the clearing, flanking us on both sides. I felt the weight of the mission pressing down on me. This wasn't just a fire drill. The enemy was organized, and they knew exactly what they were doing. "Cover me," Miller barked, his voice cutting through the madness. I didn't need to be told twice. My rifle was already up, tracking a target as it sprinted through the smoke-filled air. I squeezed the trigger, taking him down with a clean shot. But there was no time to celebrate. A burst of automatic fire pinged off a nearby tree, and I ducked instinctively. We were outnumbered, no question about it. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the feeling. This wasn't just a random skirmish. This was an ambush, planned and executed to perfection. The enemy was coordinated, and they knew the terrain. They knew where to hit us. "Grenade!" someone yelled, and I ducked to the side, covering my head with my arms. A muffled explosion rang out, throwing dirt and debris into the air. I got up, coughing through the dust, but we couldn't stop. We had to keep moving. We had to finish the mission. The team regrouped quickly behind a row of trees, trying to catch our breath. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I couldn't afford to show it. The adrenaline was keeping me going, but the reality of what we were up against hit me like a slap. We weren't just fighting a bunch of ragtag fighters. These guys were trained, they were prepared, and they were relentless. "We're pinned down. We need to get to the extraction point," Miller said, scanning the area. He was right. We had to finish what we started and get out, alive. I didn't know how many of us would make it, but we had to try. Our orders were clear. Neutralize the enemy's communication lines and get the hell out. The mission didn't change just because they decided to make it hell for us. "Where's Jenkins?" I asked, scanning the line. I turned to my left, expecting to see Jenkins covering our flank, but he was gone. "I saw him only a second ago. Wasn't he just behind me?" "Jenkins," I shouted, my voice rising above the chaos. I turned, eyes darting across the smoke-choked field. That's when I saw him, running toward us from the opposite side, gun raised. I was about to yell at him to get to cover when I realized the way he was running. It was wrong. He wasn't moving like someone trying to avoid gunfire. He wasn't even crouched. It was like he didn't care. "Jenkins, get down," I shouted, but it was too late. I saw the enemy sniper's shot before I heard it. The crack of the rifle rang out, and Jenkins dropped like a rag doll, falling face first into the dirt. Blood stained the earth as he hit the ground, his rifle still clutched in his hand. "Shit," I muttered under my breath. I didn't have time to process it. He was gone. The mission didn't care. The war didn't care. And now I couldn't afford to care. "Move. Now," Miller yelled, snapping me out of my trance. We didn't stop. We couldn't. If we stayed too long, more would come and we'd be finished. I looked to my left, then to my right. My squad was still there, still alive for now. But we were bleeding, and it wouldn't be long before they wore us down. I turned back to the clearing, and the first thing I saw was the flash of a gun. Just a flicker in the trees. But I reacted before I even thought. I fired. The enemy soldier dropped instantly, but it was too late. More moved in from all directions. I crouched behind a large boulder, adjusting my grip on the rifle. I took a deep breath, steadying my aim. The plan was clear. We couldn't fight them all. We had to break through, get to the extraction point. The next few minutes felt like hours. Gunfire whizzed past my head, ricocheting off rocks and trees. I could hear the heavy breathing of my squad mates, feel the weight of the moment. My fingers gripped the rifle tighter, every shot I fired feeling like the only thing that kept me alive. Another explosion shook the ground, knocking me off balance. I hit the dirt hard, and for a split second, I couldn't hear anything but the ringing in my ears. My head was spinning, but there was no time to think about it. I pushed myself back up, my vision blurry for a moment as I tried to focus on the enemy positions. Miller's voice cut through the haze. "We've got to push now. We'll make a run for it on my mark." We were about 200 yards from the extraction point, but it felt like miles. Every step we took, it seemed like more enemies appeared. I didn't have time to count, but there were a lot of them. Then Miller gave the order, "Run." We didn't need to be told twice. We moved as fast as we could, sprinting across the open ground, bullets buzzing by us like angry hornets. The extraction point was in sight, just up ahead, but the enemy wasn't giving up. "Get to the trucks. Now," Miller shouted, waving us forward. I didn't look back. I didn't have the luxury of checking if anyone was behind me. I kept my head down and ran, my legs burning, my lungs screaming for air. Just as I reached the trucks, I heard it. The unmistakable sound of a rocket-propelled grenade coming from behind us. "Get in. Move, move, move," Miller screamed, pushing me into the back of the truck. The RPG hit just as the last man climbed in. The explosion sent shockwaves through the air, and I felt the truck jerk forward, the force of the blast pushing us all back. The enemy was still coming, but we were out, for now. The truck roared to life and tore out of the clearing, leaving the chaos behind. I could still hear the sound of gunfire, but at least it wasn't aimed at us anymore. For the moment, we were safe. But I knew one thing. This wasn't over. It was never over. We didn't even make it a mile before the truck screeched to a halt. I was still catching my breath, sweat dripping from my forehead as I scanned the tree line. The rearview mirrors were filled with nothing but dust and trees, but I wasn't convinced we were out of danger. "Get out, move fast," Miller barked. We didn't question him. We never did. The truck rolled to a stop, and everyone was out in an instant, rifles in hand, moving into position. The engine cut off, but the thudding in my chest didn't. We were still too close to the enemy's lines, and every second we spent here was one more chance for them to track us down. I couldn't shake the feeling in the pit of my stomach. Something wasn't right. The rest of the team regrouped quickly, but I kept looking over my shoulder. Jenkins' face kept flashing in my mind, the way he dropped like a rag doll, the shot that took him down. We were all supposed to be in this together. But the way Jenkins acted, he'd gone off script. He hadn't been following orders, and that nagging feeling started to build up in the back of my mind. "We're not clear yet. Move up," Miller said, pushing us forward. We moved fast, sticking to the tree line. We were still a few miles from the extraction point, but it was like everything was coming at us too fast. Every crack of a branch, every whisper of wind, it all felt like it was setting us up for another hit. We reached the abandoned shack Miller had planned to use as our temporary hideout. It wasn't much. Just a small wood and stone building with bullet holes in the walls, but it was enough for the moment. We piled inside, but the tension in the air wasn't just from the mission. It was something else. "Check your gear," Miller ordered. I was already moving to inspect my rifle, checking my mag, making sure the sights were straight. As I pulled out my sidearm, I noticed something odd. The magazine seemed off loose. I twisted it, checked it again, but the clip looked wrong. It wasn't the one I had loaded this morning. It didn't make sense. Nobody had access to my weapons except me. I was sure of it, but I didn't have time to think about it. Not yet. "Something's off," I muttered to myself. I looked over at Sergeant Miller, who was talking with Ramos and Thompson. They were strategizing, but something in the way they were speaking seemed off. Too calm, too controlled. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. "I'll take first watch," I said, slinging my rifle over my shoulder. "Fine," Miller replied, not looking up. "You know the drill." The others began to settle down for a quick rest, but I stayed near the door, peering through a crack in the boards. The last thing I wanted was to be caught off guard again. I was used to having the upper hand, knowing what was coming. But now, I wasn't so sure. Hours passed in that shack, and the tension only built. The light outside was fading fast, the woods growing darker by the minute. Every noise sounded amplified. The wind, the creak of the shack, the sound of boots shifting on the floor. It was all too much. My mind kept racing. My rifle felt too heavy, my hands too light. And then it happened. I heard something. A rustle. Faint, but there. Outside. It wasn't the wind, and it wasn't an animal. It was something, or someone, moving in the brush. I tapped Miller on the shoulder, my voice low. "We've got company." Miller nodded, eyes sharp. He motioned to Ramos and Thompson to check the rear. We all grabbed our weapons, slipping back into formation. I moved toward the window, pressing my back against the cold, splintered wood. The rustling grew louder, closer. Then a single shot rang out, right through the side of the shack. "Shit!" Miller yelled, ducking for cover. The shot missed, but barely. I could hear the faintest crack of glass behind me as the bullet went through the window. "Move, get out," Miller shouted, scrambling to his feet. The moment we moved, the shots started coming in fast, multiple directions. We didn't have the luxury of a plan anymore. We had to get the hell out. I grabbed my pack and ducked low, but just as I made it to the door, I caught sight of something that stopped me cold. One of the squad members, Thompson, was standing in the middle of the room, frozen. He wasn't moving, and he wasn't reacting to the gunfire. "Thompson," I shouted, but he didn't respond. I rushed toward him, grabbing him by the arm and yanking him out of the line of fire. He didn't fight back. He just stared straight ahead, his eyes glazed. "That's not Thompson," I muttered under my breath. Before I could react, Thompson, no, the person pretending to be him, smiled, an eerie grin spreading across his face. He raised his rifle, aiming directly at me. I ducked to the side, just in time. The bullet grazed my arm, but it was enough to knock me off my feet. "Ambush!" I shouted, pulling myself up and scrambling for cover. Miller and the others opened fire. The imposter took cover quickly, but we couldn't hesitate. We needed answers. Fast. As the fight continued, I couldn't stop thinking about the loose magazine in my weapon, the strange behavior. And now this, Thompson wasn't Thompson at all. Someone in our own squad had been working for the enemy. I couldn't trust anyone. Not anymore. "Take him out," Miller ordered, his voice firm, but a flicker of doubt crossing his face as he realized what was happening. The rest of the squad closed in, weapons aimed. The imposter raised his hands, but it was too late. A quick series of shots took him down. But the damage was already done. We had a mole in the squad, and there was no way to know who else was compromised. The mission had already gone sideways, and now we were deep in the shit, surrounded by enemies who knew exactly where we were. I turned to Miller, my mind racing. "What the hell do we do now?" I asked. Miller's face was grim, but he didn't hesitate. "We move out. Now. We stick together. Nobody else gets left behind." We gathered our gear, moved fast, but something had changed. The mission wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about finding out who in the hell was trying to bring us down. The night was closing in fast, but we didn't have the luxury of waiting for the dawn. The enemy was on our tail, and we had to keep moving. No time for rest, no time for questions. As we made our way deeper into the woods, the air felt heavier, like the world itself was holding its breath. We moved in tight formation, the sound of our boots barely audible in the thick underbrush. No one spoke except for Miller, who occasionally whispered orders, his eyes scanning the darkness around us. "Stay sharp," he said, his voice low but clear. "We don't know how much longer we have before they catch up." I wasn't looking at Miller anymore. My mind was still on Thompson, or whatever the hell that was. The guy who had looked like Thompson sounded like Thompson, but sure as hell wasn't Thompson. I kept replaying the way he'd moved, his eerie calm, that sickening grin he flashed before the gunfire started. That's when it hit me. The traitor wasn't just a mole. He was a damn sleeper cell, planted in our squad to take us out when the time was right. But now wasn't the time for questions. We had to survive, get out of this godforsaken mess, and deal with the rest later. The woods were eerily quiet, except for the occasional snap of a branch or rustle of leaves underfoot. My eyes darted from shadow to shadow, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching us. It was the same feeling I had earlier, but now it was worse. It was suffocating. We pushed on deeper into the forest until we reached a clearing. There was a small cabin off to the side, an old, dilapidated thing that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. It could be the perfect place to set up a temporary defense, at least until we figured out our next move. But I wasn't sure it was safe. Not anymore. Miller signaled for us to take cover behind a stack of logs and debris. We crouched low, keeping our rifles ready. I scanned the area once more, my finger twitching on the trigger. It was just too quiet. Too damn quiet. I don't like this, I muttered under my breath, looking over at Ramos. He didn't answer, just nodded, his eyes wide, scanning the trees. He knew exactly what I meant. That's why we're staying low, Miller said, his voice calm but with an edge to it. We're not far from the extraction point. We can hold up here for a few hours. I didn't like the idea of staying put for too long, but I had to admit he was right. We couldn't keep moving aimlessly. The enemy would catch up sooner or later, and we'd be even more vulnerable without a plan. But just as I was about to lower my rifle and settle in, I heard something. The unmistakable sound of footsteps. It wasn't the usual crunch of leaves underfoot. It was too steady, too coordinated. My heart skipped a beat, and I quickly signaled for the squad to take cover. There was no mistaking it. The enemy was closing in. I gripped my rifle tighter, waiting for Miller's command. I knew what was coming. We were about to be hit, hard. I just hoped we were ready. The first shot came from the right, the crack of a sniper rifle splitting the silence. I hit the ground, instinctively rolling into cover behind the cabin's ruined walls. My heart was pounding, adrenaline surging through me. I didn't even think about the danger. I just moved. "Return fire," Miller shouted. We opened up, laying down suppressive fire in the direction of the sniper. It wasn't perfect, but it gave us enough time to reposition. The squad was on edge now, their faces hard, focused. We weren't scared. We were pissed. More shots came, but they were spread out now. The enemy had us surrounded. They were flanking us from all sides, and it wasn't going to take long before they made their move. "Get to the cabin," Miller ordered. We moved as a unit, making a run for the structure. It wasn't the safest place, but we needed cover. I had no idea how many were out there, but it didn't matter. We had to fight. We had to hold our ground. We reached the cabin and took up defensive positions around the door. My heart was still racing, but there wasn't time to feel fear. I set my sights on the tree line, waiting for the next move, the next shot. We didn't have long. The first wave of enemy soldiers came crashing through the trees, their weapons raised. The squad opened fire. The air was filled with the sharp staccato of gunfire, the smell of gunpowder thick in my nose. My rifle felt like an extension of my body, each shot fired with precision, each target falling to the ground in quick succession. But it wasn't enough. They kept coming. I heard the scream of an explosion behind me, and the cabin shook as if the earth itself was ripping apart. I felt the blast wave push me forward, knocking the wind out of me. I was thrown against the wall, my vision blurry for a second. I couldn't tell what had just happened, but I didn't have time to wonder. I rolled to my feet and saw Ramos go down, his body dropping like a rag doll. His rifle slipped from his hand, hitting the floor with a dull thud. "Ramos!" I yelled, but there was no response. I didn't have time to process it. I couldn't. I had to keep moving. We were being overrun, and there wasn't much time left. I pushed forward, my rifle raised, firing into the mass of enemy soldiers. The cabin was no longer just a defensive position. It was our last line of defense. If we didn't make it out of here, this was it. "Fall back," Miller ordered, and I didn't hesitate. We fought our way out of the cabin, moving toward the extraction point, but it was chaos. Explosions, gunfire, and the screams of men all around us. I was still firing, trying to clear the path ahead, but it felt like we were getting nowhere. The extraction point was just ahead, but we weren't alone anymore. The enemy was right behind us, closing in with every step. "Keep moving. We're almost there," Miller shouted, but his voice was strained, urgent. I looked back once, just once, and saw the rest of the squad behind me. We weren't going to make it all together, I knew that much, but at least I could try. I pushed forward, not looking back again. The rain started to fall like clockwork as we made our way toward the extraction point, a cold, steady drizzle soaking through the fabric of our gear. I could feel the weight of the mission pressing down on me, But it was more than just the enemy we had to deal with now. It was the ticking clock, the knowledge that every step we took brought us closer to a confrontation we weren't ready for. But we didn't have a choice. Miller led us through the dense forest, his voice cutting through the growing tension. "Keep it tight. We don't want to give them a target." We've been on the move for hours, and every step felt like a gamble. We had to stick to the woods, avoid the roads, and pray to God that we weren't spotted. The only thing we had on our side was the terrain, but even that was starting to feel like a trap. Ramos was still fresh in my mind. I hadn't seen him bow down, but I could still hear the sound of his body hitting the ground. It wasn't just the mission I was worried about anymore. It was the men I was supposed to trust. Thompson, the traitor, had thrown everything into chaos. I still couldn't wrap my head around it. Who could be trusted now? I glanced over at Miller. He'd been on edge ever since the attack. His eyes were sharp, constantly scanning the area, his hand never far from his rifle. But he hadn't said a word about the traitor. It was like we were all supposed to ignore the fact that someone in our own squad had tried to kill us. I wasn't sure if he knew who the traitor was yet, but if he did, he wasn't showing it. Either way, there was no time to talk, no time to dwell. "We've got an opportunity here," Miller said, his voice low but urgent. "The extraction point is compromised. Intel just came through, there's a supply convoy passing through, but it's moving fast. We're going to have to take it." I stopped walking. "You're talking about hijacking a convoy?" Miller gave me a sharp look. "Do you have a better idea?" I did not really. But the idea of taking on an enemy convoy, especially with the state we were in, felt like a death sentence. But that's why we were here, right? To survive at all costs. "We don't have a choice," Miller continued, reading my face. "If we don't take this convoy, they'll cut off the route to the extraction point. We'll be stuck here surrounded. This is the only way we make it out." He was right, but it didn't make me feel any better about it. "We move fast, we move quiet, and we get the job done," Miller said, rallying the squad. "No hesitation. Get in, get the supplies, and get out. Any questions?" No one said a word. We were all in this together, whether we liked it or not. The plan was simple, in theory. We had to intercept the convoy, take out the guards, and seize whatever weapons and vehicles we could. It wasn't a long shot, but it was risky as hell. A mistake here meant our extraction was gone, and we'd be hunted down like animals. We made our way toward the convoy route, using the cover of night and the rain to our advantage. The trucks wouldn't be able to see us coming in the downpour, and the sound of the rain would cover any movement we made. It wasn't a perfect plan, but we were out of time, and we had no better option. When we reached the ambush point, I could feel the tension in the air. We were all quiet, weapons raised, eyes fixed on the horizon. The convoy was coming. I could hear the engines in the distance, the low rumble getting louder with every second. I gripped my rifle tighter, sweat mixing with the rain on my palms. This wasn't how I imagined going out. Not like this. But as the trucks came into view, I didn't hesitate. I knew what needed to be done. "Now," Miller barked. We opened fire. The first shots rang out, loud and vicious, shattering the stillness of the night. The convoy screeched to a halt, the driver of the lead truck slamming on the brakes. The guards, caught off guard, scrambled for cover, but it was too late. I took down the first guard in seconds, a clean shot to the chest. The others were quick to react, but we had the advantage. The squad moved like a well-oiled machine, moving in on the convoy from all sides, clearing the area as we went. The sound of gunfire had echoed through the trees, the air thick with smoke and the smell of burning rubber. I didn't think about anything else. I just moved, taking out the guards one by one, making sure the rest of the squad had what they needed to secure the convoy. "Move! Get the trucks loaded!" Miller shouted, his voice urgent. "We don't have much time." We had taken control of the convoy, but it wasn't over. The enemy was going to retaliate and fast. The trucks were loaded up with weapons, supplies, and ammo, but there was no guarantee we'd make it to the extraction point before the enemy found us. I didn't have time to think about it. I just moved, taking cover and making sure the convoy was ready to roll. We had what we came for, but now we had to get out. Fast. "Go, go, go," Miller ordered, and we piled into the trucks, ready to push toward the extraction point. The convoy rumbled to life, and we started moving. But I wasn't convinced we were safe yet. The enemy had to know what had just happened, and when they figured it out, they were coming for us. We were in the clear for now, but the danger wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The convoy rumbled down the narrow, rain-soaked road, but no matter how fast we moved, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. Every mile, every turn, it felt like we were one step away from an ambush. The trucks were loaded with supplies, weapons, and ammo, things we desperately needed to make it out alive. But the longer we stayed in the open, the more exposed we became. The enemy would be on our tail soon. I just hoped we had enough distance between us and them. "Eyes up," Miller called from the front of the convoy. "We don't stop until we hit the extraction point." "Got it." The rest of the squad nodded, but I could see the same look in everyone's eyes. We were tired, physically and mentally. But there was no room for hesitation. If we stopped now, if we gave them an opening, we were done. The rain was still coming down in sheets, and the road was slick, making every turn treacherous. The truck slid slightly with each sharp curve, but we kept pushing forward, navigating the muddy terrain. Then, without warning, the first shot rang out. It came from the tree line on the left, a burst of gunfire cutting through the night like a knife. "Ambush," Miller yelled. "Take cover now." The sound of gunfire exploded around us as the enemy opened fire from all sides. I didn't hesitate. I jumped out of the truck, hitting the ground and rolling into the cover of a nearby ditch. My rifle was up before I even realized it, the adrenaline already kicking in. We were surrounded. I could hear the sound of footsteps on the wet earth, the rustle of branches. They were closing in fast. I fired blindly into the darkness, knowing the enemy was there but not able to see them. The rain was making it hard to see anything clearly. The world around me was a blur of smoke, gunfire, and the stench of wet earth. "Cover the trucks," Miller barked, moving toward the lead truck, where the rest of the squad was taking cover. "We need to get them moving or we're dead." We didn't need to be told twice. I sprinted toward the truck, my boots sinking into the mud with each step. The others were already in position, firing into the trees, trying to keep the enemy at bay. I could see the enemy now, shadowy figures moving in the trees, firing from every angle. They were well-organized, skilled. They knew exactly what they were doing. The first enemy soldier popped out of the woods, sprinting toward the truck with his rifle raised. I fired and he dropped like a sack of potatoes, but there was no time to celebrate. More were coming. I couldn't see how many, but I could hear them closing in. "Get the trucks moving," Miller shouted again, his voice strained with urgency. "We need to get the hell out of here." We pushed forward, laying down cover fire as the truck slowly began to reverse, moving toward the path ahead. But the enemy wasn't letting up. The rain made it difficult to hear, but I could tell they were flanking us, trying to cut us off. I glanced over at Ramos, who was crouched next to me, eyes wide with fear. He was good steady, but even he was starting to show signs of cracking. The fear was starting to creep into all of us. "Don't stop shooting," I yelled, but I couldn't tell if it was for me or him. We were in the middle of a firefight, and the enemy wasn't about to let us leave that easily. The truck I was covering suddenly jolted forward, the engine revving as it began to pull away from the ambush point. We couldn't afford to stay still, not for a second. The convoy had to get moving. We were sitting ducks out here. I heard a shout from the other side of the truck and saw Miller ducking behind it, his rifle raised. He was directing the rest of the squad, and I knew exactly what was coming next. The extraction point was still too far away, and they were closing in faster than we could move. Another explosion rocked the area. This one was closer, much closer. The ground beneath me shook, and I felt the shockwave hit my body, sending me stumbling backward. My rifle slipped from my hands, and I grabbed the nearest rock to steady myself. I looked up to see a massive cloud of smoke rising into the air from the explosion. The sound of gunfire kept coming, but now it was mixed with shouting from our squad and from the enemy. "Move, now," Miller screamed. We pushed forward, moving as fast as we could, but the enemy was closing in. We didn't have much time before they trapped us, and I could hear the sound of vehicles in the distance. Enemy vehicles. They were getting closer. I ran, my legs aching with every step, but there was no choice. No slowing down. No time to think. Then just as we reached the edge of the woods, we saw it. The trucks. Our extraction point. It was there, just up ahead. but the path was clear, too clear. The enemy was waiting for us, ready to make their move. I threw myself into the truck, ignoring the pain in my chest. My hands shook as I grabbed the rifle, ready for whatever was coming next. The fight wasn't over. Not yet. "We're not out yet," Miller shouted, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Get ready. They're coming." I didn't need to be told. I was ready. We all were. The truck revved, the tires kicking up mud as we sped toward the extraction point, but it was still too far, and the enemy was closing in fast. The convoy barreled down the muddy road, its engines roaring through the night, but the noise of the trucks couldn't drown out the pounding in my chest. Every bump, every jolt felt like a warning. The enemy was still out there, just beyond our reach. I knew it wouldn't be long before they caught up. "Stay tight," Miller's voice crackled through the comms. "We're almost there. Keep your heads down and get ready to move fast." I glanced around at the rest of the squad. Everyone was on edge. You could feel it in the air, the tension, the exhaustion, the fear of what was coming. But the worst part was that we were all wondering the same thing. Who was next? The traitor. Thompson's death was a brutal reminder that someone inside our squad had been working with the enemy. Miller hadn't said it outright, but we all knew it. Every one of us was a target now, whether we were aware of it or not. We'd been betrayed, and there was no turning back. I pulled my rifle closer, fingers tight around the stock. It was all I had left. The trucks rattled, the rain still coming down in sheets, but my mind kept drifting back to the last few hours. The firefight at the convoy, the gunshots, the way we barely made it out. Hell, we didn't even have time to check for casualties. "Move up ahead," someone shouted from the front. I snapped back to reality, my heart jumping into my throat. We were approaching a clearing, the path widening as we neared the extraction point, but it didn't feel like salvation. It felt like a trap. "Get ready, everyone," Miller barked. "We've got one shot at this. If we blow it, it's over." The truck slowed as we neared the clearing, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. This was it, the final push. The extraction point was supposed to be secure, but in the back of my mind, I knew we couldn't trust anything anymore. I reached for the door handle, prepared to make a run for cover, when I saw something that stopped me cold. Figures in the distance, hidden in the shadows of the trees. They were too far to make out clearly, but I knew they were armed. "Get down," I yelled. But it was too late. The first explosion hit the ground with such force it nearly threw me off my feet. The world erupted into chaos as gunfire rained down on the convoy from every direction. I dropped to the ground instinctively, my rifle already raised, but it felt like everything was happening too fast, too loud. I barely heard Miller's orders through the ear-splitting noise, but I didn't need to. We knew what to do. "Cover the trucks." Miller shouted, and we immediately started laying down fire, trying to block out the assault on all sides. The enemy had us surrounded, and the trucks were sitting ducks. I fired off a few rounds in the direction of the closest enemy, but the rain made it hard to see. Every shot was a guess. I was just trying to keep my head down and move to better cover. The explosions had thrown the area into complete disarray, but the enemy wasn't giving us a break. Then, out of nowhere, a flash of movement, one of our squad mates, Pearson, sprinting toward the truck. He wasn't looking around, wasn't checking his surroundings, just charging ahead with reckless abandon. "Pearson, no," I shouted. But before I could reach him, a burst of gunfire tore through the air, hitting Pearson in the chest. He dropped like a rag doll, his body crumpling to the ground with a sickening thud. The world slowed to a crawl as I watched him fall. I could hear my own heart pounding in my ears, my breath catching in my throat. Pearson had been one of the good ones, solid, reliable. He wasn't supposed to go down like this, but he was gone, just like that. "Focus, goddammit." Miller's voice cut through the shock, pulling me back into the fight. "We're not done yet." I swallowed hard, forcing the grief down. There was no time to mourn. Not now. Not while we were still in the thick of it. The firefight escalated as more enemy soldiers closed in. I could hear the familiar sound of military vehicles approaching in the distance. We didn't have much time. They were coming in from all sides, but I couldn't tell where the hell they were. Every direction felt like a threat. The sound of boots on the ground made my head snap to the left. I saw a figure running toward us, their weapon raised. My fingers squeezed the trigger without hesitation, and they went down in a spray of blood. But before I could even process it, I heard another shot ring out, hitting the side of the truck I was crouched behind. "Get to the trucks." "Now," Miller yelled. We sprinted for cover, bullets following us like a storm of rage. But just as we neared the trucks, I saw it. A figure in the shadows, someone familiar, someone who wasn't supposed to be there. It was Miller. I stopped dead in my tracks. He wasn't firing. He wasn't running. He was standing there, his rifle lowered, a grin spreading across his face as he turned toward the enemy soldiers closing in on us. "Move, goddammit," Miller shouted, but his voice was too calm, too controlled. It hit me like a punch to the gut. The traitor. It was him. Miller. He'd been the one feeding us into the enemy's hands all along. "No," I screamed. But it was too late. The shots rang out, the enemy closing in, and just like that, the world around me turned into a bloodbath. The world had gone completely sideways. Miller, our leader, our rock, was the one who had been betraying us all along. The realization hit harder than any bullet could, and I could feel my blood turn to ice. There wasn't time to process it, not fully. The enemy was closing in, and we were sitting ducks if we didn't move fast. I had no idea how many of us were still alive. Hell, I wasn't sure I cared anymore. But I had a mission to finish, a hell of a lot of enemies to take down, and no time to waste. I glanced around, trying to get my bearings. The rest of the squad was scattered, half of them either dead or pinned down by enemy fire. The trucks we had been using for cover were just about useless now, riddled with holes from the assault. The convoy was nothing but a burning wreck, and the enemy was closing in fast. "Move. Get to the backup," I shouted, my voice hoarse but urgent. No one questioned me. I didn't give them the chance. I didn't look back at Miller. I couldn't. Every instinct told me to run, to get out of there while I still could. But I wasn't leaving my squad. Not now. Not when it was clear as day that everything we'd worked for had been a lie. I grabbed the nearest rifle, a cold anger boiling in my gut. There was no more hesitation. No more second guessing. I wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. I was fighting for revenge. And I was going to make sure I took every one of those sons of bitches down with me. We pushed forward, my legs burning with each step as I sprinted toward the edge of the battlefield. The rain had stopped, but the world was still soaked with blood, sweat, and smoke. The sound of gunfire was deafening, and the stench of death hung heavy in the air. A burst of gunfire exploded nearby, and I dove into a shallow trench to take cover. The blast threw dirt and debris into the air, but I didn't have time to think about it. I popped up, firing on instinct as enemy soldiers appeared out of the smoke. I couldn't count how many there were, too many too fast. But I didn't care. I took them down one by one, watching as they dropped like dominoes, their lifeless bodies hitting the dirt with a sickening thud. "Keep moving," I yelled, but the words barely left my throat before another explosion shook the ground. The blast knocked me off my feet, and I tumbled back into the trench, my rifle slipping from my grip. My head rang with the force of it, and for a moment, I thought I was done. But I didn't have time to lay there. I wasn't dead yet, and neither were the rest of the squad. I pushed myself up, shaking the ringing from my ears, and grabbed my rifle. The air around me was thick with smoke, and visibility was next to nothing. But I could hear the screams, the shouts of the enemy closing in on our position. I glanced around and saw Ramos crouched behind cover, firing at anything that moved. His face was smeared with dirt, blood trickling down from a gash on his forehead, but he was still alive, for now.